everyone, and today for our extra reading that relate to the topics of this week, we have decided to cover the text Local Broadcast Journalism, User-Generated Content and Boundary Work. This text delves into how local broadcast news stations navigate the complexities of incorporating user-generated content into their news coverage. As the media landscape evolves, the role of audience or participation has become increasingly more significant, prompting journalists to reassess their traditional boundaries. The main concept explored in this text is the notion of boundary work. This term refers to the efforts made by journalists to distinguish what constitutes professional journalism versus non-journalistic content. As user-generated content becomes more prevalent, journalists face the challenge of integrating audience contributions while maintaining their authority and standards as gatekeepers of newsworthy information.
In his 2007 article, Bruns writes that studies of user-led online content is often done by applying outdated concepts, which are merely focused on production, and he suggests that we need to apply the concept of producage, which is a hybrid concept of simultaneous usage and production. And with this, the switch from traditional professionally created content to the rise of user-generated content is highlighted. This is in line with the article that we chose this week because Bruns highlights distributed content creation, fluid roles, continuous revision, and merit-based collaboration, which is in line with how journalists currently have to adapt to a more decentralized, community-driven content while they're still trying to manage control.
In the article by Picone, he introduced the concept of media user/use. This reframes audiences as active participants rather than passive consumers. This theory highlights the spectrum of user engagement from passive consumption to full content creation. One limitation is its lack of focus on digital inequalities, which can restrict some users their ability to participate fully in media production. This connects directly to the Johnson and Dates 2019 study, which examines user-generated content in local journalism. This real-world example builds on Picone's theory by showcasing the challenges of participatory culture in practice, especially how professional standards can limit inclusivity.
The concept of producage, as discussed by Bird, describes how everyday media users blur the line between consumption and production. Instead of passively consuming content, users now actively participate in creating, sharing, and shaping media. This is especially visible on platforms like X, Instagram, or TikTok, where users generate content that go viral or influence public discourse. This idea directly ties into the article by Johnson and Date, as it explores how user-generated content challenges traditional journalism. When everyday users produce newsworthy content, such as videos of protests or disasters, it forces professional journalists to navigate the tension between leveraging this material and maintaining editorial standards. Essentially, producage redefines the boundaries of who creates the news and how.
As most of you might have noticed, last week in Amsterdam, violent clashes erupted on the day of a match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv. This incident, charged with tensions over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, highlighted deep divides, such as anti-Semitism, the legacy of World War II incorporated into this, and on the other side, accusation of anti-Arabic sentiments, and of course, the genocide in the Middle East from Israelis. However, social media exploded with citizen coverage, where people shared first-hand accounts and opinions, often contrasting with the more restrained narratives of traditional media. This led also that traditional media were criticized because they wouldn't show the full picture, and this critique came from the citizens. It aligns with the theory of Picone by media user and use, which highlights audiences as active participants. In this case, citizen coverage on social platforms demonstrated the spectrum of user engagement, with some users sharing objective updates and others pushing personal or political agendas. However, Picone's framework also reminds us that not all users have equal digital access or credibility, reflecting the inequalities in whose voices are amplified. Lastly, Johnson and Date's concept of boundary work further deepens this analysis. Their study on local journalism shows how professional media navigate integrated user-generated content while maintaining their standards. Here, traditional news outlets cautiously used UGC to supplement reports while avoiding politically charged terms like genocide, illustrating the challenges of balancing participatory contributions with editorial responsibility.
Let's apply the concepts of producage and boundary work from the mandatory readings to the recent case of Ajax Maccabi conflict in Amsterdam. So this event highlighted how individuals actively contributed to the media narrative by creating and sharing content on platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Videos of clashes, protests and personal accounts quickly circulated online, offering real-time updates that professional journalists often relied on for their reporting. This is a clear example of producers where users not only consume content, but also actively shape the narrative by producing and sharing it. However, the role of local broadcasters in this situation reveals the complexity of boundary work. Journalists face the challenge of integrating the user-generated content into their coverage while ensuring its accuracy and contextual relevance. They had to verify the authenticity of videos, filter out misinformation, and decide how to frame the content in a way that obeyed the professional journalistic standards. This process reflects the negotiation of boundaries between professional and amateur contributions, a central theme in Johnson & Day's discussion of how UGC is reshaping local journalism.
One of the many strengths of the Johnson and Dade article include its exploratory nature. The notion of user-generated content is a relatively new phenomenon as social media has become more and more prominent as a news source, and an exploratory approach is beneficial for a relatively under-researched area like boundary work in local broadcast journalism. This allows for the identification of potential trends and insights that can inform future research. Furthermore, the findings of Johnson and Dade's research highlight the unique flexibility of local broadcasters have in distinguishing between professional and amateur content. This insight contributes to a deeper understanding of how local journalism can adapt to the challenges posed by user-generated content. On the other hand, weaknesses of the study can also be identified. Johnson and Dade make a note of their small sample size, which can affect the generalizability of the findings. With only a limited number of responses, the conclusions drawn may not fully represent the broader landscape of local broadcast journalism in the US. Perhaps a wider scope that can be taken internationally can tackle this problem. Finally, the study primarily focuses on the operational aspects of boundary work, without delving deeply into the implications for audience engagement and trust. A more comprehensive analysis could explore how these boundaries affect the relationship between broadcasters and their audiences.